"50 years ago, tornadoes swept through West Michigan. And when it was over, 17 people were dead and over 340 were injured. I'm Chief Meteorologist Craig James.
And I'm Bill Steffen. The tornadoes that ravaged West Michigan 50 years ago were truly an amazing and unusual series of storms.
And it all started with an unprecedented set of weather conditions. And with information provided by the National Weather Service and using Storm Team 8's computer modeling software, we've recreated the conditions on April 3rd, 1956.
To begin with, unseasonably warm temperatures made the spring day feel like midsummer. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the thermometer reached the upper 70s, a full 26 degrees above average. Even more unusual was the humidity adding to the summer-like conditions. Very dry air moving in from Iowa and Wisconsin, along with very strong winds throughout the atmosphere, all combined to create conditions more commonly seen in the southern plains, not here in West Michigan.
And this evening, Storm Team 8 is live from 4 locations that felt the wrath of those tornadoes 50 years ago. We'll start with Joe Sullivan live tonight at Oval Beach near Saugatuck, the site of the first tornado.
Well, Craig, not much has changed along this part of the Lake Michigan shoreline in about 50 years. If you're not familiar with Oval Beach, it sits just west of Saugatuck and south of Douglas. It's nestled between the Kalamazoo River and Lake Michigan. Now, about 50 years ago, that tornado started just behind me here to the south along the Lake Michigan shore at the Presbyterian camp right along the lake. It then traveled to the north and, follow along with me here, came up the beach and eventually struck the old beach house that was sitting just east or inland of this structure that you see behind me here. The next structure in the path of the tornado's fury was the Saugatuck Lighthouse.
Okay, we were looking approximately in this direction.
Okay, so you're looking past the house.
Past the house, and we see all this floating stuff coming over the roof of the house.
Gene Shane never saw the tornado that hit Saugatuck, but he remembers the damage it caused.
And we were seeing things floating in the air, and one of the things that we saw was a door.
This is it. What's left.
Jack Sheridan missed seeing the tornado too. His memories come from what the twister left behind.
And came over here and just totally took the lighthouse off its foundation, totally scattered the wreckage off to the north and east.
The Saugatuck tornado formed quickly and moved even faster. Too fast for the 1956 technology and the meteorologist who used it to warn people to take shelter. 50 years ago, there was no computer modeling used to forecast severe weather days in advance. No live Doppler network to know instantly when a tornado was forming. Back then, there were none of the tools Storm Team 8 meteorologists use in predicting and warning West Michigan of severe weather. Yet, despite the primitive technology, there was some warning.
There were killer tornadoes at 1 p.m. in Wisconsin, so there was some inkling that bad weather and tornadoes were coming.
That bad weather would race across the lake, form a funnel south of Oval Beach, destroy a beach house, and then target the Saugatuck Lighthouse.
And there were a lot of pieces around, but nothing really recognizable as the old lighthouse.
No one witnessed the destruction, but local historian Jack Sheridan says the story is in the sand for anyone to read.
There's no doubt what this is. This is a cast iron piling. The lighthouse sat on probably 12 of these. The rod is bent, which would have been a result of the beams being twisted by the force of the wind.
Faded photographs tell the story. Once there, then gone, a summer cottage built on the foundation of the old lighthouse. Gene, explain to me the landscape here. What are we looking at here and then out towards Lake Michigan?
Of course, you can see the river, Kalamazoo River.
Mm-hmm. Originally known as the Bennett Place, Gene's father was the caretaker.
And then the kitchen window was here, and my dad was in the window, and I followed him because of the noise. You know, we were curious, and it was just like a train, a loud train.
From the kitchen window, Gene and his father watched the tornado pull up a giant tree and lay it gently on the ground. The home's beautiful porches and pillars untouched.
And none of the house was hurt. And
Shingles, nothing?
nothing,
Wow.
nothing at all.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Well, after the tornado passed over Jean's Head, it moved northeast towards Holland and Zeeland. Here's a map and track of the Saugatuck tornado. If you follow along on the map here, just south of Oval Beach, it moved northeast through farm country and then lifted just south of Holland near the cross streets of Washington and 32nd. And one final note I want to pass along to you. Folks around here and other people have asked, what about the radar on Mount Baldy? If you can see that behind me, it could have perhaps helped people in 56 find out about the tornado or at least see the storm. But Craig, local historians tell us that emplacement wasn't put in until about 1957, or 1 year after the tornado struck here in Saugatuck.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And for more on weather technology then and now, you can take our technology tour. Go to woodtv.com, click on Tracking the Storm icon. Then take a virtual tour of the Storm Team 8 Forecast Center. You'll learn more about how we predict and warn West Michigan when severe weather threatens.
Well, the tornado that hit Saugatuck was classified an F4, but what exactly does that mean? Dr. Theodore Fujita of the University of Chicago developed this scale rating tornadoes from F0 all the way up to F5. F0 means it creates the smallest amount of damage, but an F4 or F5 causing the most destruction. The Saugatuck tornado, based on its destruction, has been classified by the National Weather Service as an F4. There you can see the scale on your screen. The second tornado to strike West Michigan on April 3rd, 1956 was an F5. An F5 tornado is very, very rare anywhere in the United States, and it's even more unusual to see one in West Michigan. Tracking this storm 50 years later is Terry DeBoer. She's right now near the corner of Van Buren and 40th Street in Hudsonville, a place that felt the fury of that F5 tornado in 1956.
Well, that's right, Bill. I want to set the stage here for you. Back to my west here, the dark area, it's called the muck fields. It's what's left over of an old riverbed. The tornado crossed the muck fields and destroyed homes up and down Van Buren, including the home that used to stand where that brick house is today. 13 people died that day here in Hudsonville. It's a day survivors say they will never forget.
This is what happens to a car that gets caught trying to outrun an F5 tornado.
We got in the car, he went behind the wheel and I sat next to him, and my mother and my grandfather went in the back seat.
Meet Betty Overbeek. She was 20 years old when the tornado struck. In a race against the fury, Betty's dad, mom, and grandfather tried to outrun West Michigan's only F5. They didn't make it.
And then the car was just picked up and it was just flew through the air.
Betty was so seriously hurt she spent weeks in the hospital. She and her mom survived. Her father and grandfather did not.
And then I looked around and my mother had been thrown quite a distance from us, but then she came walking towards me.
Betty's family car, in fact, no car, is ever a match for the force of an F5.
Oh, praise the Lord. We could have all been gone.
On the Boss family farm, they didn't even know it was coming. Scott was 6.5 years old at the time. He was in the house. His dad was in the barn milking the cows when suddenly part of the roof was ripped away. They ran outside and saw the tornado almost 3 miles away.
Then we could see the tornado heading for the woods over there. And it was actually in the woods by that time. And it was just a big gray cloud. It looked to us like the woods was on fire.
We thought it was a fire going through Doc's woods.
Through Doc's woods and beyond, this tornado stayed on the ground for almost an hour. Most tornadoes are on the ground for only minutes, traveling only a few miles, but this monster, wow! Look at this amazing path through Hudsonville, the Standale Business District, into Walker, through Rockford, and eventually falling apart around Trufant. 1 hour, 50 miles, a lifetime of tragic loss and heartbreak. Horrible memories those who survived would never forget.
I've often questioned why our lives were saved, why I wasn't killed, why my mother wasn't killed, but felt that God had a purpose why we should still be living, that my dad and grandpa died, but we were spared.
And one note for you, when the survivors finally emerged here, everything was covered with dark black soot, a filthy, grimy reminder of nature's fury that passed through that area on that day.
Or was it one tornado or two that hit West Michigan 50 years ago? The man that knows the answer to that is Ernie Ostino from the National Weather Service, and he's responsible for changing the record books and improving our knowledge of that tornado, April 3rd, 1956. He's done a lot of work on that particular storm here over the past 20, 30 years or so.
Meteorologist Ginger Z live in Standale, the next spot ravaged by the 56 tornadoes. We'll have a story of a survivor and tell you how far we've come in the world of warning the public before severe weather happens. All of that when Tracking the Storm 50 years later returns.
For over 50 years, everyone, including the National Weather Service, thought the tornado that started in Saugatuck was the same tornado that also traveled through Hudsonville and the Standale Business District.
The house sat here. It was actually probably over to here. You can actually see the outline. I think you can see the perimeter, this kind of square area, and that was the basement part of the house. And it just lifted up and disintegrated and was carried a couple hundred feet.
And thanks to the detective skills of Ernie Ostino, we now know differently. As one of the lead forecasters for the Kent County National Weather Service, Ernie has spent more than a year recreating the path of the tornadoes. Eyewitness accounts, old photographs, and lots of footwork led Ernie to conclude that it was two separate tornadoes that struck West Michigan.
Well, after ripping through Hudsonville, word traveled faster than the tornado itself. Standale was in the path. Now, no sirens were sounded, but many could see the funnel coming. Storm teammates Ginger Z is live at Kinney and Lake Michigan Drive, the epicenter of the damage done in the Standale area by the storm of 1956.
Well, that's right, Bill. This intersection was much different, but it was developed and then leveled here in Standale back in 1956. Let's take a look with our other camera, give you a perspective of what Lake Michigan Drive looks like today. As you're looking east, back toward Grand Rapids, as we swing the camera south and eventually west, we'll see the string of businesses and homes that make what Lake Michigan Drive is to us today. Now, this land originally was owned by the man Standale is named after, Howard Stanton. He developed the area, starting with the corner here at Lake Michigan Drive in Kinney. He owned a grocery store, general store, and home right here at this intersection in 1956, right where we're standing. We caught up with Mr. Stanton's granddaughter. She was in the basement of her grandfather's store just over here when that tornado hit and ripped apart all of their lives.
It sounded like several diesel train engines.
Ever noticed how survivors like Pat Spangenberg never seem to forget the sound?
And remembering hearing the ripping of the nails as the tornado pulled the building above us off.
But from her story, one sound is alarmingly missing.
Do you remember hearing a siren at all that day?
No, I don't remember any siren.
Pat was 7, heard no siren, but a different type of warning that day.
Frank Slaymaker, the weatherman at that time, came on and told us there was a tornado, and my parents looked out the window and saw the funnel cloud coming at us.
With no basement in the house, the family and a few friends seek shelter at the family store.
We just barely got down to the bottom of the basement steps and the tornado hit. And over here is where nothing is left is my grandfather's store that we were in, the basement.
So you were in here?
Yeah.
Pat and 20 others emerged from the rubble, alive and in shock.
Oh my goodness, we just lost our whole life.
Now, there were sirens in Grand Rapids back then, so why weren't they sounded?
This would represent a large majority of the sirens that were put in starting probably in the late 50s through the 70s. This is called a Thunderbolt. They used them mostly, I believe, for civil defense at that time. I don't believe anybody was using them for weather.
Soon after the '56 tornado, the warning system in West Michigan expanded to include all types of evil in the atmosphere. That's where Jeff DePilka and West Shore Services come in. Since 1979, they've installed 650 outdoor warning sirens in the state of Michigan.
So if you're in Standale today, you'd hear something before?
Yes, you would.
Before an F5 rolled through?
You would, yes. If you were in Standale today, there's several sirens that cover that part of their town, of their community.
But that is not the case for every West Michigan community. The working number of sirens in each county varies greatly. Some emergency managers argue that sirens are confusing, limited, and not cost-effective. They say cell phones, pagers, and cable weather crawls are the warning of the future.
Well, you'll find that there are a few emergency managers that feel that way. I think that basically, though, most folks wake up later on and go, you know what? People don't always have their warning devices with them. If you're swimming, you don't have your cell phone. If you're doing something that's noisy, you can't hear a phone ring.
Community wiped out. Fast-growing.
But for those like Pat Spangenberg, who have lived through a storm like the monster of '56, the value of any warning, any sound other than that of terror, will likely never be taken for granted.
Get pretty nervous when there's weather warnings out. When it goes off, you got to pay attention to it because it's going off for a reason.
For more warning siren information as it pertains to your area, we invite you to go to our website at woodtv.com. There you'll find our homepage. Look for the icon tracking the storm 50 years later. Click on that and then choose warning sirens. You'll find maps and locations for sirens county by county. All of that information provided by many of the emergency managers around the area. Thanks to them. And back to you, Craig.
Well, thank you very much, Ginger. And we want to remind viewers there are other ways to get severe weather warnings. Storm Team 8 offers WeatherWarn, a free service that sends an alert to your home computer, pager, or cell phone. Again, it's on our website at woodtv.com. Look for the WeatherWarn icon.
Well, tracking the storm 50 years later continues as we fly with Chopper 8 and a man who witnessed the destruction from the air. What would happen if the same kind of storm hit West Michigan today?
We've told you about two separate West Michigan tornadoes in 1956, the one in Saugatuck and the other referred to as the Hudsonville-Standale tornado.
But did you know there were a total of 4 tornadoes that roared through Michigan on April 3rd, 1956? Early in the day, a tornado was spotted near Manistee. That tornado killed 2 people as it swept past Thompsonville to just south of Traverse City. Then, around 7:30 p.m., an F3 tornado was sighted near Bangor in Van Buren County. It moved northeast through Allegan County into Kent County before lifting near Lowell.
The F5 tornado that struck the district of Standale was still on the move, and if it veered south, it could have hit downtown Grand Rapids. But the tornado turned north, which is where we find Storm Team 8 meteorologist Matt Kirkwood live on Alpine Avenue near 4 Mile. Matt?
50 years ago, Craig, not that far behind me, a family of 6 anxiously watched the sky and listened to the radio to see if the F5 tornado was going to hit their neighborhood next.
At the time of the tornado, this house was about half this wide, and it was L-shaped.
Willie Postma survived the '56 tornado.
We could easily see the thing coming across the river. You could see it, big black funnel cloud.
So too former radio announcer Bruce Grant. 2 survivors they've never met, yet one credits the other with saving her life.
The announcers on radio started saying there's a storm coming tonight, there's a storm coming.
Willie and her husband were worried. If the tornado was headed toward Walker, they needed time to get their 4 sons to safety.
We were listening to Bruce Grant.
By 7 p.m., with the tornado heading towards Grand Rapids, a young Bruce Grant was warning West Michigan not from the safety of the studio, but from the top of the tallest building in Grand Rapids.
And I knew that people were being injured and dying. And I thought, well, what can you do? You try to maintain your calm and tell people what to do, and that's what I did.
And all of a sudden, Bruce Grant said, it's turned, it's heading north. Everybody on the north side of Grand Rapids take immediate cover.
Willie and her family did just that. Minutes after Bruce's warning, huddled in the corner of their basement, the tornado struck.
And it was just a terrible, terrible noise, just a roar. And it hit, and we were in daylight. There was nothing over our heads. We were right outdoors. And if Bruce Grant had left that speaker and hadn't kept announcing, we just wouldn't have taken cover like we did.
I've waited 50 years to meet you.
Well, I'm glad you're still here.
Well, I'm glad you're still here.
50 years later, Storm Team 8 brought the 2 survivors together, one thanking the other for a job well done.
I can't begin to tell you how much this means to me.
Well, I'm glad.
It's been a long time. We've wanted for years to tell you thank you. You saved our lives that day.
And interesting to note, the April 3rd, 1956 tornado was one of 2 F5 tornadoes to ever hit Michigan. The other one was the Flint Beecher tornado, and that was the last one to kill over 100 people. Craig?
Well, thank you, Matt. And when the tornadoes here in West Michigan were all over, 17 people were dead and more than $1 million in damage was caused by West Michigan's only F5 tornado. But what would happen if the same kind of storm followed the same path today?
Homes destroyed and cars and everything laying around, and oh yeah, extensive trees down, and it was a real sharp path. Of course, we didn't have all these homes here then, so.
Now, Bill Chasen worked for the National Weather Service and 50 years ago flew the path of the tornado from Hudsonville to Standale. Storm Team 8 did some digging and came up with some numbers representing populations then and now. In 1956, there were just over 8,000 people living in the Hudsonville and Georgetown areas. No surprise, the number of people living in the same area has grown throughout the years. Estimations today are over 52,000 people. When we return, what every home should have in case of emergency weather or otherwise, as Tracking the Storm 50 years later continues.
Well, what should you have on hand in case of an emergency? For that, we go back to Storm Team 8's Ginger Z.
Well, there are a couple of things you need and things that are intuitive, but people just don't have in their homes. You don't think it'll happen. Well, it could. You want to have food that makes sense, of course. You've got the anything that canned or non-perishable, stuff that would make a meal. I looked around at my house, it's kind of embarrassing. I really wouldn't be nourished by much of this, so have a better meal. Also, NOAA weather radio, extremely important. A battery-operated radio, along with, of course, extra batteries, because you want it to work throughout the emergency, and of course, plenty of that bottled water. All of those are very important things, along with a plan for you and your family or your place of business, maybe even the random places like the gym. Just know where to go and know what will happen in the time of emergency.
Well, thanks, Ginger.
And the city of Hudsonville and the National Weather Service are working to promote severe weather safety by commemorating the 1956 tornado. On April 3rd, this plaque listing the 17 people who died 50 years ago will be dedicated. The event starts at 5:30 at the Hudsonville High School. All survivors and their immediate family are invited to attend.
Now, for more information on the commemoration, along with more information on the 56 tornado, please visit our website at woodtv.com.
And thank you very much for joining us this evening.